July 24th. That day, the day Judson Horlber Button was born in 1839 in Newberry Center, Ohio, is known as Pioneer Day, a day marked by sacrifice, determination, and an enduring journey west. By the time Judson was just 5 years old, his family had already set in motion a journey that would take them across the harsh American frontier. The Buttons, converts to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, left Ohio in 1844 for Nauvoo, Illinois. The journey was exhausting, and Judson, small as he was, would have felt the toll of walking hundreds of miles alongside his parents, Montgomery and Mary Button, and his siblings. It must have bewildered Judson to leave everything familiar behind in Ohio, including his maternal grandparents Thomas and Annie Biddles. The new sights and sounds of Nauvoo probably filled his young mind with wonder. When the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were martyred in 1844, Nauvoo became a place of tension, filled with grief and uncertainty. 6-year-old Judson would have felt the unease of those around him, even if he couldn't fully comprehend the weight of the events unfolding. In February of 1846, the Button family was forced to cross the frozen Mississippi River, leaving Nauvoo forever due to persecution by angry mobs. The bitter cold, combined with the brutal trek through Iowa, must have left lasting scars. Judson, like the other pioneer children, walked through endless mud, dirt, and snow, a reality that we can hardly grasp. How did Judson, a boy on the brink of turning 7, cope with the physical and emotional exhaustion of the journey?
I am Levi Button Godfrey, a fifth great-grandson of Judson Button. When I was in primary, I sang the words of the primary children's song, Pioneer Children, but I didn't know I was singing about my grandpa. As a little boy, Judson walked and walked and walked and walked.
At Council Bluffs, Iowa, Judson's father, Montgomery, answered the call by Brigham Young to serve in the Mormon Battalion, which became an iconic part of pioneer history. Judson, his mother, and his 3 siblings accompanied the battalion, along with a few other families and children. The pace of the trek and the sickness that plagued many of the travelers made life unbearably difficult. After 2 months, the leading officers of the battalion decided to send the families and sick soldiers to Pueblo, Colorado, where they would winter. In the spring of 1847, the Buttons left Pueblo with a group of Saints heading north through Colorado and into Wyoming, hoping to meet up with the main body of the Saints. Judson celebrated his 8th birthday on the trail. Just 5 days later, on July 29, 1847, the Buttons and their traveling companions arrive in the Salt Lake Valley to join Brigham and the Vanguard Group. The excitement of finally reaching Zion raced through the company, but what of Judson's feelings? Did he find the vastness of the Salt Lake Valley a place of hope, or was he simply glad to stop so much walking? 2 weeks after first arriving in the Salt Lake Valley, Brigham Young decided to dam up the small creek near camp and rebaptize first the quorum of the 12 apostles and then the remainder of the company. As Wilford Woodruff wrote,
"We considered this a duty and privilege as we come into a glorious valley to locate and build a temple and build up Zion. We felt like renewing our covenant before the Lord and each other."
They baptized for 3 days, culminating on Sunday, August 8, 1847. 288 people were baptized in total, including Judson, his brother James, and both his parents. Every hand was needed to build shelters and plant crops before the approaching winter and the arrival of new pioneers headed westward along the trail. No doubt Judson was given important chores to help his family and others. After the fort was built and the crops were planted and harvested, it was time for the children to begin their schooling. In October 1847, the teacher Mary Jane Dilworth started teaching Judson and about 50 other children in a tent. Later, a room was built in the fort. Here is a picture of that classroom. Judson's pioneering days weren't over. At age 11, Judson and his family, along with 2 apostles, Emma Lyman and Charles Rich, left Salt Lake for California to establish communities to be trade routes for goods and way stations for convert immigrants who sailed to the West Coast rather than up the Mississippi. The Button family with other families settled in what would become San Bernardino, a town filled with untamed potential and hostility from local Indians and bandits. In response, the early settlers built a fort for protection. Life in San Bernardino proved challenging. As the California gold rush drew thousands of newcomers to the state, Judson's father Montgomery took advantage of the demand for transportation, building a freight business. By the age of 12, Judson was working alongside his father, handling teams of horses and mules. Was this the life he wanted? Did he like horses, being constantly on the trail and sleeping under the stars? In 1856, Judson found himself in Los Angeles, transporting a group of Latter-day Saint converts who had sailed from Australia. Apostle Amos Lyman assigned Montgomery and his sons to go to the port of San Pedro to bring the converts to San Bernardino. Among the group was a young woman named Ellen Kingston Taylor. Little did Judson know that this 14-year-old girl, whom he likely saw as just another face in a crowd, would become his wife just 4 years later. In October 1857, the members of the church in San Bernardino and elsewhere received an urgent plea from President Brigham Young to gather back to Utah in the face of a threat from an army that was heading toward Utah. Montgomery and Mary Button obeyed the prophet Brigham Young by leaving their home in San Bernardino and moving to Beaver, Utah, where they settled. The widow and Taylor and her family accompanied the Buttons on the journey. Perhaps it was during that trip that Judson and Ellen became interested in each other. A few years later, when Ellen was 17 and Judson was 20, they were married on March 16, 1860. In Utah, Montgomery and Judson made a good living, just as they had in California, by hauling freight. The 1860 census shows that Montgomery was the richest man living in Beaver, Utah, with land and other property of almost $4,000. Judson and Ellen moved back and forth several times between Beaver and Circleville, Utah in the 1860s. This was likely because of Indian hostilities, known as the Black Hawk War, that occurred in the Circleville area during that period. We have a military pension document labeled Indian Wars that shows that Judson served as surveyor or scout in 1866 and 1867 under Captain John Hunt. Referring to his role in the Indian War, Judson's obituary includes this tribute. He met the dangers of frontier life bravely and helped save the colony from the Indians. The 1870 census shows Judson, age 30, and his family living in Beaver, Utah, and that they owned real estate worth $350 and personal property valued at $3,000. They had 5 children ages 9 through 3 months. Judson was working as a freighter. Apparently, the financial condition of the family worsened during the next decade because the 1880 census shows that Judson was working as a laborer living with his family in Circleville, Utah. Their oldest son, Charlie, was herding cattle. It is also interesting that next door to the Buttons in Circleville lived the Parker family. 14-year-old Robert Leroy Parker, whom Judson's children would have known very well, grew up to be the famous outlaw Butch Cassidy who robbed banks and trains in the West before fleeing to South America. During their years living in Utah, Judson and Ellen had 10 children, the first of whom was Charles Montgomery Button. Our line of the family descends through Charles. Sometime around 1888, Judson and Ellen moved to southwestern Colorado, near Montrose, where they purchased a farm. We don't know why they moved, but it is likely that they had been told by their neighbor Butch Cassidy about the good farming country in that area of Colorado. We really know very little about Judson and Ellen after they moved to Colorado. What we do know about them comes from a letter their granddaughter Florence received from her Colorado cousins with whom Judson and Ellen lived in their final years. The cousins explained that Judson had burned all his and Ellen's books, records, and photos after Ellen died. The act remains one of the great mysteries of his life. Questions we wish we knew about them include why they chose to remain in Utah despite Judson's parents deciding to return to San Bernardino in 1861. Did little Charlie ever actually meet his grandpa Montgomery and grandma Mary face to face? Are these 2 pictures of Judson? We think so, but the labeling of them was unclear. Judson lived a long life, 85 years, but his passing was as shrouded in mystery as his life. The funeral of Ellen, who died a year before Judson, had been conducted by a leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But a Protestant minister conducted Judson's funeral. Why would that be? Was that his choice, or the choice of his son Parley, who lived next door? Did Judson's faith waver in his final years? Judson's obituary described him as a man who became well-known and highly respected throughout the section, but offered little insight into his internal struggles, his faith, or his true character. Why were the details of his life so elusive? And why did he leave so many questions unanswered? At the reunion we will all have in the next life, perhaps Judson will answer our questions.
For some was push and some was pull as we go marching up the hill. So merrily on our way we go until we reach the valley, oh.